could I see. They knew not my name.
They knew not my name.
And I knew not their faces.
And I knew not their faces.
I found they were all.
I found they were all strange
strangers to me.
Strange strangers to me.
They've all moved away, said the voice of the stranger, to the beautiful home by the bright crystal sea. Some beautiful day I'll live in heaven, where no one will be a stranger to me.
Everybody I met,
Everybody I met
seemed to be a rank stranger.
seemed to be a rank stranger. No mother nor dad,
No mother nor dad,
not a friend could I see. They knew not my name.
They knew not my name.
And I knew not their faces.
And I knew not their faces.
I found they were all.
I found they were all rank
strangers to me.
Rank strangers to me.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, buddy.
James King, what about it?
Thank you, folks.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Where'd the old town go? They moved it all north of here in the shopping mall. Ooh, where'd the old town go? Did my hometown get old, or just me? Did all my friends get old, or just me? Are they all gonna have to be told, or just me?
Good morning and welcome to Old Town Cleveland here on WOOP FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.woopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. And my lovely co-host, my wife, I'm privileged to say so. I used to say it was an obligation, but that got me in trouble. So, Deb Moore, tell us about our program today.
Good morning. It's September the 14th, and we have fall in the air this morning. It was so nice to come out and it not be humid at 7:30. We're glad to have Jim Hodson here with us this morning, and we're going to be talking about a variety of things. And this is your day to call in and tell us what you know. We're going to be talking about why things are named things here in Bradley County and
Why you say things.
why people say certain sayings. And Jim's going to lead a little bit of a discussion on Chickamauga, because this is the 150th anniversary week of the battles for Chattanooga and Chickamauga. And Jim actually brought a book. He's the only friend of ours that reads. Anytime we have an author on, we usually have him, but today we have him on. But we're going to have a good time just talking and being with you today. We want to remind you of a few things before we get started here. First of all, every Thursday night from 5 to 8 p.m. down here at the Bistro, you can come by and see Cleveland native Shane Lowe playing music. And then on Wednesdays, I believe JoJo Collins is here from 6 to 9 p.m. I'm reading that all the way across the room with no glasses on, so I hope I told you the right thing.
You did.
And then today, the Cowpea Festival is finally here. Up in the big town of Charleston, they're having their annual
polo matches today?
festivities starting at 10 o'clock this morning. The polo matches down at Bendabout Farms. Those activities on the farm are free. Sometimes they ask for a little donation, but it's just a thing if you want to give to the Calvary. I think it's the 6th Calvary Museum down in Fort Oglethorpe. Never been there, but I plan to be there. But anyway, the polo matches are today at 10 o'clock, tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm planning to be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. And then again on September the 27th and 28th, 10 o'clock on the 27th and 28th. I may have those dates wrong.
That's
Well, anyways,
Yeah.
it's a Saturday and a Sunday, and they have a team all the way from South Africa, I believe, this year. Last year they had someone, I believe, from Australia. So it's really
It's a long way to ride a horse.
that's a long way to ride a horse. That horse can swim really well, but that's what's going on in that the community today. And I just like every time each year when it gets this time, I think about our community losing a fine young soldier, David Weir. And David Weir, and I just want everyone to know that our thoughts remain with his family.
Yes, sure do. And of course, all the soldiers and people who went on harm's way there. Jim, how you doing today?
Very well. Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to be here, Jim. Now you're tell us your rank there at the sheriff's department, so I get that right.
I'm major over the administration bureau.
Right, and we're
That means he's not in charge, but he's responsible for everything.
well, he gets blamed for everything.
Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
it.
You're not in charge, but you get blamed.
I tell them my job description is history detective and magician. I'm
okay.
supposed to know everything that's ever happened at the sheriff's office, and I'm supposed to do the impossible on a regular
Right.
basis. So.
Yeah.
And you do it very well.
Can you make this money appear in the budget, right?
Yeah.
Boom. And before we got on there, I had the opportunity to ask Jim how Sheriff Roof is doing. You know, he had some health problems a little earlier this year, and you were. I'm glad to hear that you say he's doing great. And
Yes.
had some procedures, and things are even better. And he's 20 years old again, right?
Well, yeah, he really feels tremendously better since the procedure he had done, and we're solving his rapid heartbeat
Right.
issue, and they finally found a surgical solution rather than a medical
Wow.
solution, and he's feeling much better.
Well,
that's
good.
That's good to hear that Sheriff Roof, and just make sure you tell him us folks down here at
I
Whoop
sure
said
will.
hello to him. I don't get to see Jim much anymore. You know, back when we were all running around the sheriff's department together, ran into him quite often. I always liked being with Jim because Jim was big and strong, and I'd like to get behind him. But Jim, you know, we grew up here and things, you know, and there's obvious names, and then Deb and I sat in breakfast and I says, you know, there's Tucker Springs and there's Blue Springs and Spring Place,
Ball
and
Springs.
Ball Springs, and basically those are pretty simple to come up with a name for them. That basically there was water there, and that was the name of the spring, which a lot of time was the name of the families that lived there.
Yeah,
and different
some of the
things.
pioneer families that settled.
You know, and
Well, and those names will changed over times. Like what we knew as Big Springs, which is the springs that's been capped now over close to where Wildwood Lake Road runs into Spring
There,
Place.
yeah.
Well, it was the Roth Springs at some point in time because it was part of that big Roth farm that the old house is still standing there.
And then Muskrat Springs is now Cedar Springs.
Yes. Now, and when you, I found out recently about Muskrat Springs. When you get down close to Valley View School, there's an area there that's called Cedar Springs, and there's on the old maps, the 1830s map, it says Muskrat Springs, and Muskrat is 2 words. And I found out recently that there was an Indian that lived there, and his name was Muskrat. And that's where that came from. And there was some indication there that over the course of time that it was Rats Springs, and then it would be called Rattlesnake Springs. You know, sometimes the translation would get kind of messed up. But it's pretty interesting there. It says Muskrat Springs, and then it says Rattle Springs. and then but anyway, and then I went back and looked on the 1835 census, and sure enough, there was a person there named Muskrat. So isn't that interesting? I mean, that's just kind of how it rolls, and that's true of all communities.
And I know, Jim, living down in the area, that Lead Mountain Valley. Tell people what it's called, Lead Mine Valley.
There were lead mines there.
Do you know where those were, Jim? I mean, is it obvious when you're driving down through there?
No, not anymore. There's more than one. They had prospected that ridge.
What years would that have been?
Well, after the Civil War. There may have been some minor prospecting went on before that time, but you have to remember, 1836 was when we finally stole it from the Indians, and
you were invited to leave in 1838.
Yeah, so from 1838 until 1861, not that much time for that kind of thing to go on. But after the Civil War, particularly 1880s on into the early teens, they had prospected that area for all kinds of minerals, and lead being one that was found there in a economically feasible amount to mine.
Close to the surface.
Yeah, there were some mines, I understand, if you go through the gap at Blue Springs Church Road from Blue Springs over to Lead Mine, and you turn north on Lead Mine Valley, I understand there were some mines on that side of the ridge north of Blue Springs Church, and then there were some down the other direction also. Now, if you go down Blue Springs Road to Mount Carmel Church and turn right on what's now Weatherly Switch Trail, and then turn right onto the south end of Lead Mine Valley Road, right in that area, there were some mines there that I've been told that there was maybe a quarter of a mile, about halfway between Blue Springs and Lead Mine Valley Road, that there was a horizontal shaft mine there. But the road at that time was much lower, down close to the creek there. And after they closed the mine, they sealed the entrance. A lot of mine owners did just for safety, to keep people from going in there and getting hurt. And then as the road was built up, it actually covered up where the entrance to that mine was.
And a lot of times people will think that was a cave, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about down in that area, in Flint Springs, Red Hill Valley, Lead Mine Valley, there are people who still on their property deeds today, it will talk about mineral rights and property rights, and that a lot of times people would retain the mineral rights, but they'd sell the piece of property. Have you seen that, or have you heard that? I thought that was really interesting when I was doing a lot of research down in Flint Springs. There was a lot of little mines down in there, and see, to me, I'd be driving along and I'd see some big hump of dirt laying somewhere, and I'd think, ooh, an Indian mound. But then I'd find out that there had been some mining work on that piece of property, and that was kind of the residue from that process. And on the Tennessee Digital Library, there's a picture of them mining down on one of the Hambright farms.
Farm, manganese.
Like 1934. What is that?
Manganese is a mineral that's used in steel manufacturing. It makes steel tougher, and there were deposits of it found down through there in that dark red clay that normally you only think of as being in Georgia, but there's that deposit in the Red Hill area, and then there's another deposit up around Athens, up in McMinn County, that if you look on the map, they're kind of in line geologically with the way the ridges run and so forth.
And what kills me is
would all that been shipped to the Carnegies?
Well, it was probably most of it was shipped south to Birmingham, by the time they started, but some of it probably did go north. But
now, as early as the times that John Ross was living down in the Flint Springs Valley, that area was referred to as the Red Hill Place. And at Red Clay, when you go there, look at the ground, it's white. There's not any red clay at Red Clay State Park. But when they're talking about Red Clay and Red Hill and all that in all the old Indian papers, they're talking about what we call Flint Springs in Red Hill Valley.
Before we get any further, I want to talk a little bit about Chickamauga. You know, that battle took place a few years ago now. Jim, your summary of Chickamauga?
the Cliff Notes
The Cliff Notes.
version. Well, for the book I brought in is when I first really started studying the Civil War in a semi-serious manner about 20 years ago. This is one of the first books that I bought, and this is Peter Cousins' This Terrible Sound, which is I was asking my resident historian at the Sheriff's Office, Doug Town, this is still the definitive work on Chickamauga. So if anybody really wants to know about everything there is to know about the Battle of Chickamauga, this is...
Where does Peter Cousins live? Cozzens.
I'm not sure. He worked, at the time he wrote this book, he worked for the State Department. And he actually had done all this research and was assigned to somewhere in South America or Central America when he wrote this book. And
he worked for the State Department in Georgia or Tennessee?
The United States.
Yeah.
Oh.
Foreign service officer, diplomat.
Okay.
But
that state.
he also wrote a book about Stones River called No Better Place to Die.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen that one.
That's also a very, very good book. But he may be retired now. I'm not sure where from his State Department job. He wrote this book in '92. So he could very well be retired.
Okay, Jim, what's your thoughts on, and we'll get back to Chickamauga here in a second, in some of the old stories and diaries and such, you hear people as far away as Ocoee saying that they could hear the cannons firing. What do you think that was possible?
I do. There's
if it was that loud in Ocoee, imagine what it was like on East Ridge.
Well, we know we live near the speedways. According to which way the wind's blowing, the wind blowing towards this way, you would get a lot more sound.
Yeah, and you know how far the sound of thunder carries, and it would be similar to that. It would sound like, I'm sure from a distance, it would sound like a continuous roll of thunder from some distance away.
It had to be a haunting sound.
Oh yeah, and I was down at the battlefield a few months ago, and I was thinking about. Anytime I go to a battlefield, I try to imagine what it would have been like there, and Chickamauga is a particularly compelling example because you had an area that was heavily wooded, visibility was not all that good, the troops engaged couldn't see each other further than maybe 150 yards unless they happened upon a field or a clearing. And that was well within their rifle range, and so if you were in contact with the enemy, you were within deadly range at that time. And there were
no radios.
A lot of no radios.
You had no idea where the enemy was.
A lot of leaders being casualties, and then therefore the leadership role having to devolve down onto from generals and colonels and captains down to lieutenants and sergeants, and there's a lot of confusion, smoke. If you've ever been around where a lot of black powder firearms are being fired, tremendous amount of smoke, the noises from the wounded, and it must have just been hell there on that battlefield. And the fact that there were so many lost, about 18,000 Southerners, 16,000 Federals.
All Americans.
Yes.
Needless to say.
10 Confederate generals killed or wounded, including John Bell Hood, who lost a leg there at Chickamauga. It must have just been just a tremendous, agonizing sight, even to witness, much less to be a participant in. But Chickamauga, the battle took place because 1863 was a very pivotal year in the Civil War, and the North was trying desperately to end the war quickly. They wanted a decisive victory. The South had still been hanging on to the idea that they might be recognized by France and England and perhaps find some other solution to the war other than a military victory, which was beginning to look unlikely at that time. In the early part of the year, as a matter of fact, starting in December, New Year's Eve of 1862, the Murfreesboro campaign and Stones River had pushed Bragg's army back to this side of the Elk River. And they kind of went into winter quarters there, and Rosecrans went into winter quarters at Murfreesboro, and there was not much activity.
Right. It was just too bad to fight. Isn't
And
that something?
It's too muddy. They said it was one of the reasons the roads were just like knee deep in mud. They just couldn't move wagons and horses and men across that terrain. But Rosecrans was being pressured very much by Halleck and President Lincoln to move against Bragg. Lee had gone into Pennsylvania on the Gettysburg campaign. Vicksburg was under siege by Grant, and so they wanted.
Was that in July of 63?
In July of 1863 is when Lee lost Gettysburg and Vicksburg was surrendered to Grant by Pemberton, and that was when Rosecrans had just started pushing Bragg back east. Of course, the objective was Chattanooga, which was an important rail junction and had rail access to the Tennessee River, and still the remnants of the old Memphis to Charleston Railroad passed through Chattanooga. And, of course, the Union had pretty well controlled the railroads out of Nashville. They had Memphis had fallen, and New Orleans had fallen. Vicksburg was basically all the South had left as far as a major river port. So as Rosecrans began to push Bragg back to the east, he had the daunting task of finding food and sustenance for his army, not only to move them there, but then to arrive with enough food and equipment to do battle once he arrived at Chattanooga. Bragg feared being trapped in Chattanooga because if you don't think about Chattanooga, the city it is now, think about Chattanooga extending about 9 blocks from the Tennessee River down to about what's M.L. King Boulevard today, a city of about 2,000 people. That was Chattanooga in 1863, surrounded on the east by Missionary Ridge, on the north by Stringer's Ridge, just across the river there at Red Bank. Then you had Cameron Hill, then you had Lookout Mountain, Raccoon Mountain, and all those other mountains there, Missionary Ridge extending down into Georgia. So it was a good place to have as long as you held the high ground. But if the enemy ever got the high ground, there you were down in that
bowl,
in that basin. So Bragg was trying to figure out, where is Rosecrans going to cross the river? Where are we going to be attacked? And there's a new book out, and I can't think of the author's name. It's called Failure in the Saddle, and it's about how Bragg's cavalry commanders did not do the job they should have.
We kind of felt like after we've studied this more often that if somebody shot Bragg early on, maybe the South would have done better.
Well, Bragg was not well liked. His generals...
He couldn't pull the trigger. I mean, it seems like to me that he'd sit around while the other forces, built up, and
he was sometimes slow to react, and he was always second guessing himself. You had two very eccentric generals there. Rosecrans was very eccentric also, and he was a good strategist, but it was like he didn't have a plan B. And you know what they say, no plan survives contact with the enemy, and if his original plan started to fall apart, he was slow to figure out, okay, well, now what do I need to do
What's
now?
plan B, yeah.
So by August, late August, the Union Army was within artillery range of Chattanooga and began to bombard the city, not in a serious way, but just to kind of, they wanted to drive Bragg out of Chattanooga, which they did. They evacuated probably at least 50% of the civilian population from the city, and then Bragg began to withdraw south down toward Lafayette. He was out of the city by mid-September, completely out of the city by mid-September, and they went down to Lafayette and kind of paused to regroup. Rosecrans had chosen to cross the river down at Shell Mound over in Marion County, and came across the river there. He had explored river crossings as far north as Blythe Ferry, Cottonport, that area, and the Southern cavalry had picketed the east side of the river, or south side, depending on what you want to call it, this side of the river, in an attempt to discourage Rosecrans. And there was some talk of crossing at Cottonport, but they realized that they would have to then cross the Hiwassee after they had crossed the Tennessee. So if things had worked out differently, it might have been the Battle of Mouse Creek instead of Chickamauga. They might have fought in this direction rather than that direction of Chattanooga. But once Bragg reached Lafayette, he finally got word that reinforcements were en route from Virginia. They had sent Longstreet down with D.H. Hill and somebody. And by this time, by September 2nd, Knoxville had fallen to the Union. Burnside had moved in and taken Knoxville. So that cut the railroad line for the South at Knoxville. And Burnside began to make plans to move south and secure the railroad as he came. They had to send the troops from Virginia down through North Carolina, South Carolina, down into Georgia to Atlanta, and then north to get them to Chickamauga. It was over 750 miles as opposed to 550 miles the direct way. So it added a couple of days anyway.
Yeah.
So Bragg had decided to try to get his army between Rosecrans and the city of Chattanooga and kind of slide back up into the Chattanooga area and then force Rosecrans further south. It didn't work out so well because they were aware, Bragg was not aware that the Union Army was aware that he was coming back north. And so the Union got some reinforcements down in the area, and they engaged on the 18th, had skirmishing and sent more reinforcements to the area. And then the next day, the battle began in earnest. There were several Confederate attacks, and that's another thing about Chickamauga is they would take ground and then lose ground, and it would go back and forth from one side to the other. I have a story I'll tell you about in a minute about one of the wounded from Chickamauga. But finally, some of Longstreet's people get there, and the next day they really decide they're going to make a major assault on the Union lines. Well, General Woods was one of the junior generals in Rosecrans' army, and twice during this campaign from Middle Tennessee, he had been reprimanded by Rosecrans for not promptly following orders. For some reason, Rosecrans looked out across the battlefield and he thought he saw a gap in his lines, and he sent a messenger and told General Wood to move his brigade to the right so many yards. Woods knew there was no gap, but he knew that he had already been reprimanded twice for not following orders, so he did what he was told. He moved his troops to the right, actually behind another line of Union troops, and actually created a gap in their lines. Longstreet saw this happening, saw the gap opening up. That's where they concentrated their forces, and they turned the Union right flank, sending Rosecrans and a good portion of the army back toward Chattanooga, basically in a rout. Brigadier General George Thomas, began to rally the troops and formed up on what they call Horseshoe Ridge or Snodgrass Hill, and held the Union line there. And that's where Thomas got the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga. Later, he actually relieved Rosecrans as commander of the Army of the Cumberland. But there's a General Granger who was head of what they call the Reserve Corps. He was up in Rossville. He heard the Union cannon up on Snodgrass Hill, and he could tell by the volume of fire that it must be some pretty desperate action. So without orders, he brought his troops down and reinforced Thomas and allowed them to hold the line there at Snodgrass Hill until darkness the second day, and then that night they withdrew under cover of darkness back toward Chattanooga. And the next day, Longstreet and General Polk urged Bragg to pursue Rosecrans and drive him further, if nothing else, drive him back toward Knoxville. But he declined. Thomas urged Rosecrans to counterattack the Confederates because he knew they had been hurt bad, losing 18,000 men out of a total of about 65,000. But he wouldn't counterattack. He decided to stay in Chattanooga. So the Confederates began to slip into the high ground, Missionary Ridge, Lookout Mountain, and occupy the high ground around Chattanooga, and then began the siege, which, if you had to call a winner, Chickamauga was a tactical victory for the Confederates. They were left in possession of the battlefield. Rosecrans withdrew, but Bragg did not succeed in doing what he really
didn't
intended
finish.
to do. He didn't defeat the army. He didn't didn't get to stay in Chattanooga. He didn't control
But
the.
now Bragg set up on Lookout Mountain when basically there was no trees left in downtown Chattanooga. They'd cut every tree down.
Oh yeah.
To build shelter and wood and things like that.
Or the cannons knocked them down.
The troops are gone. I mean, they were didn't the Union troops get down into 11 or 1200 in Chattanooga at one time?
I don't know if it's
Got
that
waiting.
small, but it was down greatly reduced.
Maybe, but if Bragg had just come off the mountain, they would have done just what you said. They would have won, beat Chattanooga. I mean, the Union troops there, right?
They waited. Their idea was that they didn't think that U.S. Grant could establish what was called the Cracker Line to resupply and reinforce Chattanooga. They didn't really think that it could be done because, see, after Chickamauga, they controlled the railroad coming in to Chattanooga from Stevenson, Alabama, into Chattanooga. So the Confederates controlled that. So Grant couldn't use the railroad. He was going to have to come overland, which he did. This network of little mountain switchback roads, and if you've ever been down the W Road, it's probably about like that, but dirt,
And rain.
That probably every road they had to go up or down one of those mountains on was like that. But Grant managed to do it and resupply and relieve Chattanooga, and then put them in position to.
Yeah.
2 months later, we're talking
basically
talking November now.
Basically, the Confederates woke up one morning and looked down off the mountain and says, "Oh, yeah, a lot of them down there."
Yeah,
now."
there's a lot of
just
them
like
there now.
overnight. It
Yeah,
just,
Grant, Phil Sheridan.
Well, what was going on here in Bradley County? Of course, there were Union troops that had moved in here to Bradley County, and hadn't. I mean, they had kind of run the Confederates out because the Confederates just didn't want to be here. But there's going to be a reenactment on October the 4th and 5th down around the library of Union troops encamped, and it'd be a great time to take your children to see that. And it's as far as I know, it's free to the public. School children are being invited on that Friday, and the public's being invited on Saturday, October the 5th. You'll need to catch that. What's going on down at Chickamauga for this 150th anniversary?
They're having a big reenactment, not on the battlefield itself, but on some private property near there.
Wonder why they're doing that.
There's certain things they can't do on the federal property.
Oh,
but-
okay.
But they are having events on the battlefield and special tours and bus tours and things like that, and walking tours. And if you live in this area and you haven't been down there, I'd encourage anybody.
They
to
have
go.
changed a little video. Ron and I were down there within the last 5 or 6 weeks, I think, and saw the new video.
Yeah, I haven't
and
seen
they
that.
have an incredible gun collection.
Oh yeah,
and
The
a little
Fuller
small
gun collection.
museum there.
it's the best battlefield I've been to so far. I mean, I haven't got to go to Vicksburg or Gettysburg,
Yeah.
but
I haven't been to Vicksburg in many years. I want to go because they have the that they have that gunboat that they raised there, and Ed Bears, the historian for the National Park Service, that was one of his pet projects, getting that boat raised and restored in this exhibit.
Well, I had relatives that fought there.
Yeah, me too.
And I wanted to go, but every time we talk about going, it's either flooding or it's 113 degrees. There's never an in-between there.
Well, Vicksburg isn't as big a military park as Chickamauga is, as far as being spread out over such a wide area, because it was a city that was under siege, and it's a little more compact battlefield to tour. But there's a lot to see there.
it's like Fort Donelson up in.
Now, Fort Donelson impressed me because it still had so much of the earthenwork there. That is, it's
see, the
it's a
other
pretty
one,
sad thought to think that you're down in there and people are shooting by your head.
What was the other one? The other fort? The name escapes me up there. The one's underwater now, near there. Fort Donelson and Fort Henry.
Yes, thank you. My brain was going, I know, I keep thinking
It's
of it.
underwater now.
It's interesting when you start going to these battlegrounds, battlefields, and you see, and you watch their little introduction tapes that most of them have in there, and you start seeing what the Union troop did in splitting Tennessee in half from Fort Donelson down to Corinth or Corinth.
Mississippi.
Yeah, Mississippi, and where that was a railroad cross place too.
Savannah,
so.
Tennessee has a good museum too. They call it the River Museum, and it's right there on the downtown street, and it covers
I've
all
never
that.
been there
lot.
either.
That's a good little museum to go to.
I-
Although the lady there knew nothing about the Trail of Tears, and by the time I left, she knew more than she wanted to know.
Have you been to Shiloh, to the battlefield?
Yes.
There?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that you talk about a place that's in the middle of nowhere.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you just and there it is. you
And
know.
it's kind of creepy
We
too.
drove for a long time on Highway 64
Yeah.
across the state. Good morning, you live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ron. Deb, how you doing?
Hey,
Bullet.
If you don't believe what happened to me last night,
What happened?
I left the game and sprained my ankle.
Oh, no.
But I'm gonna be all right on it. I'm already putting pressure on it. But that's ridiculous. Here it is, football players out there playing. Here it is. I'm a fan.
More dangerous to the fans than the players.
Tell you what, you heard what old Joe said about me and you, Ron? He said we're in a cahoots.
In cahoots. Yeah, you would keep winning all the
Yeah, what's
trivia
that cahooting?
questions.
Well, I think what
That cahooting will get you in trouble.
been trying for about 3 weeks.
Oh, no, you can't resist.
But anyway,
Well, see, now I give you a hint last night. I don't know if you guys would have got it or not.
I was going to say Red Bank
another
if
word
he
that
hadn't
I
given
wonder
the
what-
hint, and I was going to say Wayne McFarland too, but I wasn't sure what he played. But anyway, if nobody had, I gave people a try a chance to call him, but I was going to say Red Bank.
Yeah, I think Wayne played. He was the defensive end, and he also punted and done the kickoffs and extra points. And so,
Well,
A one-man band.
He's been a friend of mine. I ever knew him before he started going to high school.
right.
And anyway, it was a good game for all three of our football teams, and I'm just proud of all of our teams around here.
Yep. All three of the local teams won. Polk didn't have quite as much luck, but
That was kind of a. Now I don't understand that because he's
I don't either. So
well, football's strange, you know that.
global warming.
Anyway, I thought I'd give you and Deb a shout. I'm gonna probably be down your house here in a little bit, and
Well, I turned the pump off. Nothing's wrong with it. Just everything was full of leaves, and I was too lazy to clean it up.
that's all right. Don't worry about it. Anyway, well, we'll talk to you later.
Okay, cahoots. CAHOOTS. It's a combination of a French word that means cabin and hut, and it means that you're in collaboration with each other. There you go. Nothing funny much about that one.
I kept
Flat
trying to figure
rock.
out what booyah meant.
Booyah.
That's a fishing lure.
Really?
Yeah. So that's where the name
Now,
comes from.
guys, y'all
Just
need to-
sounds good.
Y'all need to quit saying stuff I can't spell because I have to look everything up.
Good morning. You live on Old Town Cleveland.
How you doing, Ron?
Hey, Brett. How are you?
Good.
So what's going on?
Working on some stuff for this weekend.
Oh,
Hey, Brett, ask Ron who he picked to win the Tennessee game today.
Who you picking the Tennessee game?
well, if you read the paper, I picked Tennessee.
Yeah.
Well, and I will tell you that was an absolute mistake. I was just sitting there marking my paper, sent over to Richard at the Banner, and apparently I circled Tennessee with no intention to circle Tennessee, so I look like the idiot today. Of course, now if Tennessee wins today,
You're
I'll
a
look like a
genius.
genius. So, Brett, Bradley Walker Valley plays this Friday night, big cross county rivalries. Who's going to win?
Bradley,
What's the score going to be?
you have to follow me on Twitter. You have to follow me on Twitter.
I don't tweet.
No, the people do.
Oh, people do. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not going to tell us today?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to have to get on Twitter.
I do that sideline wrap up.
Yeah.
They do all the polo scores on Channel 9,
Yep.
all the updates and stuff.
Yes.
I follow them too.
Oh, well, good.
And Channel 3.
And Channel 3, yes.
No, Channel 9 and Channel 3.
Both. Oh, all right. Wow.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I was going to let you know there's a doubleheader today.
Okay. Who's playing?
Miami and the Mets.
All right.
A doubleheader. One at 4 today. One at 4, and another one tonight at 7.
Okay.
At 7:45, Ron.
Okay. Sounds good.
Doubleheader.
Double header.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of football on today, too.
Yeah. Tennessee don't start till 3:30.
Yeah, and I think at the same time that Alabama and Texas A&M starts, too, isn't it?
Yeah.
So flipping back and forth today, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for calling, Brett.
I'll talk to you next Friday, Ron.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
I asked Deb this morning now, if you're from the South, a lot of people say y'all, But you ever notice here in Cleveland, Tennessee, we say Ewans?
I have read that is an Appalachian thing,
Is it?
Ewans, and that it extends. You'll even find people in Pennsylvania in the mountains that say Ewans. That's what I've heard.
I just think it comes from origin of a group of people that it was some word in another language, and because we lived in the mountains so close to each other.
Well, I've had friends come in here and they say Ewans.
Ewans, Ussens, and Weans.
What you calling that to me? Go ahead, Collie. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ron and Debbie. How you doing?
Doing
Good
great.
morning. Who are we talking to?
You don't know who this
Arnold.
Oh, hey, Arnold. When you said that, I knew who it was. What's going on, buddy?
I know the whole lot. I'm going to kind of kick back to something you was talking about a little bit earlier about the Chickamauga reenactment.
Yes.
It's going to be, what I understand, is originally supposed to be held on a farm that Walker County had purchased out on 136.
Yes.
But there's some questions about whether it's going to be ready or not because of some things that's been going on and some stuff not taken care of properly. And there's also working on the bridge on 136. So, but
Yeah, there was some
it's going
EPA
down there.
problems. Now, someone dug a bunch of things and there was a bunch of runoff, and someone complained.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember reading that now.
Yeah.
My.
So I say just stay tuned to like Channel 9 or check Channel 9 website to see what's going on. Probably is the best thing.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot about it in the paper down there too. I'm sure that's where I've been reading most of my stuff. Yeah.
Well, I know somebody's worked really hard, so I hate if it all gets messed up.
Well, that's true. They had like a 10-acre site that they was working on for the actual reenactment to take place on, so it was going to be a pretty good deal, I think.
I don't know, Arnold, if you caught it or not, but last week on the Tennessee Railroad Museum ran a steam locomotive from there to Cleveland and back, and Matt Bentley from down at Bendabout Farms posted the pictures on Facebook that showed that old steam engine roaring through the community, and I just loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was interesting, and you know that track down through there. There's a lot of stuff going down towards Somerville, but you know that could be used a whole lot more, and I think it has been. But you know, there's not been enough interest yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm kind of hoping that I know that some people that I knew that there were several people that rode it from Cleveland to Chattanooga, and wouldn't it be nice if they made that part of their regular route?
It would be. There's a lot of lines around that's not being used hardly at all anymore that could be used for stuff like that, but you've got to find stuff at the end of the lines to kind of get people's attention too.
Does the Blue Spring line still get used a lot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does it? I know
Yep.
one time it just there was a sideline and they just parked things on it for a long time.
Yeah, that was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
That was
Right.
before they ribbon railed the track, and they use it quite often now. I hear them all the time.
Oh, well, I'm going to get back to doing my stuff. Y'all have a good show.
All right.
Thanks, Arnold. Bye-bye. Several, or I guess it's in the last couple of years, you sent me a picture of Flat Rock School down in the community. Why was it named Flat Rock?
Well, because it was kind of built on a big flat rock. There's the
Nothing extraordinary about that.
No rocket science there. That area down there, that part of Bradley County, there are a lot of areas where there's maybe 4 or 6 inches of soil on top of limestone rock down there. There's a lot of it. I can remember as a child down there on my grandfather's place, a lot of limestone rocks they stick up out of the ground, you know, but the where that school was if you go down Blue Springs Road to Mount Carmel Church and hang a right on Weatherly Switch Trail over toward Lead Mine Valley Road, where Weatherly Switch Trail continues on west, and Lead Mine Valley Road veers right to the north, right in that intersection, just slightly to the right of the intersection, was where the school was, between there and where the Maroon Branch Fire Hall is now. And there was a big flat area of limestone rock out there, and there may have been a lot of flat rocks in that area, but I know the schoolyard, if you see the pictures, it is rock.
The kids are all like standing out on this big rock out in the front of the building.
It's sort of like Big Springs was over here. It was up on a rocky where the old new jail is.
Yeah.
That was the second Big Springs church. Our good friend
Cool.
that we lost this. school, excuse me, our good friend Carl Green that we lost this year, he informed us that he had gone to the original Big Springs School, and it was straight down the road in front of the Springs going east. And then when they rebuilt it, they put it over on what we call Johnston Boulevard. Let's go back to Weatherly Switch. Tell everybody why that's called Weatherly Switch.
Well, there was a family that lived down there that had a big farm.
The Weatherlys.
The Weatherly family. And I think there's two brothers that were
they came in here real early.
Yeah, main property owners, and they managed to persuade the railroad to put in a side track and a switch there, and it was used a lot for agricultural products. There was a lot of peaches grown down in that area at one time. My dad told me, I remember hearing about, and other products that they would, I guess, put box cars on the side track, and they would load those up, and then the railroad would come and get them.
And they'd say, just stop at Weatherly Switch, and they knew where that was.
Go ahead, caller. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ewan.
Hey, Ewan.
My Korean veteran is down at the farmer's market.
What's he got today?
He's got green beans. He had 7 bushel of them. He done sold a bunch of them. He's got cucumbers. He's got tomatoes. He's got okra. He's got a load of stuff.
I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Well, I love you so much.
Love you too, Bernice. Thank you for calling. Y'all go by the farmer's market and see them.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes. All right, Deb, I'm going to ask you a bunch of yours.
Oh, no.
Speck Hospital.
Well, there was a doctor named Dr. Speck.
Well, see, you know, unless you know it, and then PNS Hospital.
Physicians and surgeons is what I understand.
I think that's right, yeah.
That's it.
Okay, Tasso.
You know, let's go back to those hospitals. That shows how society's changed. They had like 12 beds, 14 beds. Go ahead.
And they
Tasso, you know Tasso. You tell that story.
Well,
now, first of all, when they first started up in Tasso, they called that
Chater Valley.
Fish Creek.
Yeah. Well, and Fish Creek, right?
Fish Creek, and I've heard 2 stories there. There were a lot of fish in the creek, and there was a family named Fish that lived there that was like a half-breed family that was still there when the railroad came through.
And then they called it Chatter Valley, and eventually that became extremely confusing because the Chattanooga Mail was ending up at Chatter Valley, and the Chatter Valley train stop was getting the Chattanooga Mail, or back and forth, in other words. So a rail worker decided to change the name to Tasso. Has absolutely nothing to do with anybody in America. Has absolutely nothing to do with anybody in this area or anything of that nature. He knew of an opera singer from over in Europe named Tasso, and he just liked Tasso singing, and so he named it Tasso. How's that for a reason to name something here?
Absurd reason. Well, Chattanooga Valley is on the old maps prior to the removal, and I understand that that's it's either a Creek word or I think it's probably a Creek word. And it means clear water. And we have Jack Sanders coming on September the 28th, Segway, to talk about the old families in that community and the old buildings that are still there, and everybody will want to tune in on that one. Ron and I saw a nice-looking young lady up at the Red Ribbon, and she was talking to us about knowing about that community, and I hope if she's listening, I think her name's Mrs. Ledford. If she's listening this morning, we'd like for her to give Jack a call so she can come be on the show with him.
Now, Jim, being an old policeman around Cleveland, we'll get to this here in a minute.
Ran?
Good morning.
Good morning, it's Sarah's girl.
Yes,
hey,
how are you?
What's up, April?
Oh, just milking a few cows.
Yeah.
You were talking about Fish Creek?
Yes.
Tasso was called Fish Town before it was called Tasso.
Okay.
Fish Town.
It's got an E on the end of it. It's Fishe.
Was there a name? Was there a family by that name there?
Yes.
Okay.
From what I understand, I think it's an Indian name.
That's what I understood. That even when the railroad came through, there was still a family living there by that name.
Yeah. And we actually have a map that has it on there, and it says Fishtown.
That's wonderful. Yep.
Instead of saying Tasso or whatever. And that was because of the train. Matter of fact, the train stopped on the tracks right now. That was because of the train. Whenever it came through, they just picked up
whatever they think could do.
The name of who lived here that was at the drop point for,
right.
The mail and goods.
That's right.
Like that. But what does your speaker know about the train wreck that happened right here?
What, in Tasso?
Yeah.
You tell us about it. Is that the one where you had the explosion?
I don't know. We don't know a whole lot about it. I just know it's here, and everybody's hush-hush about it.
Well, I think it's just the exact location of it's just gotten lost over the years.
Yeah, Junior said it's, Bird Dog said it's train explosion.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was, go ahead, Jim, you tell it.
Well, they were trying to blow the train up.
The Confederates were trying to blow up the U.S. train.
And it didn't work out that way.
They put all the dynamite or whatever it was on the tracks. The train came through, it didn't blow up. And so they went out on the tracks and they fixed it. And then by chance, one of the Confederate trains came through and they blew up their own train.
Their own train instead of the... And there's been some rumor that there was gold on that train. And
there's always rumors about things being on trains and all that kind of stuff. But my understanding is that the area has been cleaned out and roads have been put in and stuff.
Oh, the railroad itself has been rebuilt.
Yeah,
several times.
See,
but now there was right there at that cemetery where we're talking about, April. I can't remember the name of the cemetery off the top of my head, which amazes Ron at this moment. The Ramsey Cemetery. Is April still? Are you still there?
By the church.
Yeah, the Ramsey Cemetery. That's over behind there's some businesses there on. I don't even know. You know where I'm at. Well, there was actually a log cabin church there during the Civil War, and when the Union soldiers came through, they spent the night there in the church, and the next morning when they got up, they just disassembled the building, put it on the train, and took it south with them.
Right.
April, I understand now. This might be something for you to consider. You know that Confederate train blew up and it had gold everywhere, and it went all over your farm up there.
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Well, but see, what you do is you give people a shovel and a bucket, and for $25 they can have a shovel full of dirt into their bucket, and they can mine for those gold coins.
I also like the
I'm not really sure, but if you read in books and stuff, some of it says it happened, north of Cleveland, headed to Charleston. Then some say, it's on down the tracks. It's like it's never really pinpointed.
Whatever I read made me think that it was right there behind the Ramsey Cemetery.
But now, April, if you put up a sign there and it says this is where it happened, that's where it happened. Because there's nobody alive. It was around to dispute you.
April, one of my favorite stories about the Tasso depot there is Mr. Hancock that lived here in Cleveland. He lived over here close to Joe Rogers' Office Supplies. Mm-hmm. He worked as the depot guy up in Tasso, and many days at the end of his shift, he would walk the railroad track to Cleveland and come all the way back to Cleveland every day. And I'm thinking, it looks like he could have caught a train somewhere along the way.
That's what I would try to do.
And a hitchhiker, at least.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. But, we do have a little bit of that history as far as stuff like that, but we don't have a whole lot of it, even though, that's where we're at. And, of course, the cemeteries and stuff that's around here, we just don't have a whole lot of stuff. Just because it's not been passed down from generation to generation.
That's right. And there are a couple little good books that you can't get your hands on anymore that people wrote about living in Tasso. I think there's I can't remember her name now. I know she was a nurse, and in 1961 or so, on the anniversary of the Civil War, she wrote a book about Tasso, and it's just a little paperback book, but it's got probably some really good information about why roads are called things, and the Ramsey Cemetery, why it was called what.
Manley? Elizabeth
Yes.
Kate Manley?
Yes.
Yeah. She's also the one who did the documentary on their cemetery, too, at their church.
Okay. And where is it?
I don't know.
Is it in a book?
It's just sort of one of her handwritten things where she's wrote about the families and stuff that's buried there. Because, of course, a lot of them in the older part of the cemetery is unmarked. So that's sort of the only records we have. It's not necessarily, in plot one as so-and-so, but it just sort of tells the people who were buried there name-wise, and if they were in the lower cemetery there at the church, which, of course, nobody's ever buried in now. That's just the older part. But, she was the one who had documented back in the day. She had just documented what she knew and who all was buried there. She was sort of
And she didn't realize. Maybe she did realize how important that is, but she did write some good books and stuff.
Meticulous work, far as who is there and their dates, even though maybe they're not on their tombstones or they didn't have a tombstone period. And that's the reason we don't bury people in the lower cemetery. We don't know that there's.
It's obvious to me that there's people there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we just leave them be and just use the top cemetery.
There you go. Well, thank you, April.
All right.
Always good talking to you. Bye bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, Jim, coming out of Cleveland, Tennessee, on Inman Street under the underpass, you get to the top of the hill there, and there's a light. There's a road goes to the right on Wildwood, and the other one goes straight on 64, and that's called Forked Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why that's called Forked Lightning?
No, I don't.
Deb, tell them why it's called Forked Lightning.
Well, I don't know. We always assumed it was because there was a fork in the road.
Well,
but there was at some in the
there
18th,
was a bar there.
There was a saloon. Excuse you, a
The
saloon
called
there.
Forked Lightning in that intersection. I always thought it meant it was the light was forked, and it was an Indian term. What I thought growing up, and then we found out there was actually a saloon right there in where that intersection is.
Where the old gas station building is.
Yeah, called Forked
You probably
Lightning.
could get some liquid lightning
Yeah,
there.
white lightning. Mm.
Wildwood Avenue there too is one of those that you start thinking it's a long way from its namesake, because you have to get all the way out to Wildwood Lake out on Spring Place Road before you get to its namesake. But you got to kind of think about before Spring Place Road was built where it is now. That's how you got from what we call Dalton Pike now out to to Wildwood Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, McDonald, Tennessee, Deb.
Well, there's kind of a dual thing there that there was a guy that worked on the railroad when the railroad came through, that he operated everything down there, and his name was McDonald. But back before the Indians left here, there was a trader that we think was probably related to John Ross. I believe his mom was a McDonald. We think that there was a trader there, and his name was McDonald. So we figure that it was named after one of the two of them. You see the credit given both times, that maybe the community was named originally after that trader, and then the depot was named after the man that ran the railroad. There you go, McDonald.
Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning. This is Lisa Poe Jones.
Hey, Lisa Poe Jones. What's going on, sister?
Well, you have made me feel special today.
Oh, good.
Because I've been to several of the places you have talked about. I've been to the grave of General John Bell Hood's leg in Tunnel Hill, Georgia. And that is a trip I highly recommend to everybody.
What is that?
The tunnel at Tunnel Hill, Georgia, and then down the road from it, John Bell Hood's leg is buried. They actually sent it with him from Chickamauga, thinking that he would die along the way, and they wanted the leg to be buried with him because there was a general prior to him who had lost an arm, I believe, and the arm ended up being buried someplace different than the body, and they wanted to make sure that didn't happen with Hood. And Stonewall Jackson. So they didn't want it to happen with Hood, and it happened as a matter of the fact he didn't die. So his leg is buried down there. You almost miss it if you blink, but recommend there. And then I have been to Gettysburg. Haven't been to many of the places around here, but we took some pictures at dusk at Gettysburg, and when I had them developed, it looks like blood is rising up off of the battleground. So.
Yeah, some pretty strange things. Now, I know down at Liberty Baptist Church in Tinga, Georgia, there's a fellow buried there, and then the grave next to him is marked that it's his leg.
This one, I think,
he apparently died, and then they thought about what we do with this leg.
And they couldn't dig him back up?
No.
Okay. Well, this just has a little wooden marker. There's nothing special about it. I hope eventually they kind of play it up a little bit more, especially with this 150th anniversary. But that is such an essential part of this history with the general and everything that you've talked about recently. And
well, everyone's missed the Tunnel Hill reenactment because I think it was last weekend. But it's a great place to go. They got a little museum. They got a little small charge to go in there. They now have a big golf cart that they'll drive you down to the tunnel if you're not able to walk that far. And you can also go through the old house there.
Yes, the house is actually open only in the summer and certain other times, and we were there in March, so we didn't get to go. But my children were fascinated, and we're going to go back. And just one more thing, I'm going to get off here so you can get a break. I've lived in Tasso for 11 years, and if you go down to Louisiana, Tasso is actually a type of ham.
Oh, there you go. That's good to know.
So Tasso could be named after a ham. Maybe a rail car load of ham was going through. Maybe
We'll have to look that one up.
Yep.
Thanks, Lisa.
So y'all have a great day and keep doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to remind everybody that there's a black lab, and his name is Drake, and he's missing. He's been missing now for a couple of weeks up in the Mouse Creek area, and there is a reward if someone has been taking good
Drake,
care of
if you're
him.
listening.
So, Drake, if you're listening, turn yourself in.
Phone
I have the
home.
number if somebody needs to call and get it.
Good morning. I pushed the right button. Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron.
Hey.
You're talking about the Weatherly family down at Weatherly Switch.
Yes.
I've got a part of a diary from one of those young men that served in the war, and he was captured, and I think he was sent to Elvira.
Oh, no, we're listening.
Palmyra.
Palmyra, he's saying.
Yeah. And another thing about the Weatherlys, right at the end of the war, a Weatherly was town marshal, and he would be my 3 grandfather. He conspired with 2 other guys in Berkeley, and they run him out on town on the rail.
Uh-oh. Yeah, they had a very unpleasant way of getting rid of people.
He disappeared from history. And one more thing. He's talking about Fishtown.
Yes.
Lewis and Niebuhr writing the book about Hiwassee Island, they said that the Uchis up here on Mouse Creek, when they was killed at that area, some of the survivors, and Fish is a clan of these, and I'm thinking that Fishtown originally a few of the surviving Uchis there.
Well, it could have been. I think that, but like I say, the Fish Town is on the old maps.
Yeah.
So it could very well be Uchis or Melungeons or Cherokees or a mixture of there above.
The Amoy Poorhouse, Cherokees in 1828 was right there in that area, Philauer Lake.
It was, and they called Philauer Lake Thompson Springs, and then it became Philauer Springs, and it was Amuchi Springs before that. And Amuchi means abundance of water.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for listening, darling. Bye-bye.
All right. Hey, folks, we'll be right back in just a few minutes. We're going to take a break to pay the bills.
WOOP LP, Cleveland, Tennessee.
Check into cash. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash. Get a title loan fast and a lot more cash. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash. Go to checkintocash.com right now and find out what your car is worth. Our expert appraisers are standing by. You get the most money from Check Into Cash. Call 877-262-CASH. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash.
Get on down. Check into cash. Ka-ching.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
You save when you buy from the factory. Now you can save even more while we celebrate the grand opening of our new store on the North Shore in Chattanooga. Plus, we'll pay your sales tax on Mermaid products $6.99 or more.
Kiesler Incorporated is in the business of recycling your metal, and they pay cash. The only covered scrapyard around where you can recycle rain or shine. They're located off the bypass on Overhead Bridge Road. Automobiles, appliances, copper, stainless steel, tin, all metals can be recycled at Kiesler, and you can walk away with cash. That's right, they pay cash, and they are the friendliest scrapyard in the Southeast. If you have unwanted metal just laying around, bring it to Kiesler Recycling today and walk away with cash. Kiesler Recycling open Monday through Saturday, 7:30 to 5, or call for more details, 614-3000.
From the white man.
Yeah. Good morning. You're back on Old Town Cleveland. We had as much fun during the break as we do during the rest of the time. You're listening to Whoop FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com, and you can call us here at 614-5553. We're talking about where things are and why are they called that. And people always ask me why it's called APD 40 when it's the bypass. And I kept saying,
US 64.
I was going, ABP would be bypass, but it's actually comes back from all the way from Lyndon Baines when he was president of the United States. They started a Appalachian Development Projects, and AP stood for Appalachian. Some say Appalachian Parkway Development. And this just happened to be project number 40 out of corridor JK, I forget which corridor it is. But if I've actually been, I was somewhere else and actually seen an APD 13 or something like that. So most people just went ahead and named the road something, but it's actually Appalachian Development or Appalachian Parkway Development. It goes all the way from Pennsylvania all the way down through this area. And it was to put roads in these rural areas here in Tennessee. And if you remember, Bradley County was, if you came from South Lee Highway, you had to go all the way into downtown and then cut across Graveyard Hill and go out and go across Wildwood and back over to Spring Place. And you couldn't get around town. So that, could you imagine back being in law enforcement, Jim, years before APD 40 was here, how do you get around town? And it's still tough to get around in some parts of the county, but the APD does not stand. It stands for Appalachian Parkway Development.
I've heard people call
Project
it
number 40.
Well, you know, it does. Part of it does have another name. The part of it that's inside the city of Cleveland, they named Harry Death Row Boulevard.
That's right. Exactly right.
It's hardly ever used.
Which turns into 25th Street immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, so people quite often ask us, never could figure that, and I finally said, I don't know, and I had to go look it up, and took a little while to find it. But
when you see where all it went, you realize it did open up a lot of commerce.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, you can see a map if you go back to the national programs and look at it. It's like the West Virginia. Go ahead, call. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Now, Ron, I done told you what that Appalachian Pass Divide is.
Oh, Divide, okay.
That's what it's called.
Right.
That's what we always called it.
Yeah, it was official, though, was Appalachian Parkway Development.
We named it that. My husband helped build it.
Yeah.
They built it from the dirt up.
You know what? There ain't no wrong answers, are they?
No, mine's right, though.
All right, well, that's all you need to
She's
know.
ever wrong, she'll let you know.
If I'm wrong, I'll admit it, but that's what we named it.
Yeah, but you're the one who decides who's right or wrong, though.
Well, that is fault. Okay, I suppose throw that in there.
Thank you, Red.
I wanted to remind everybody that the corn maze, and what a wonderful time we had with Joe Fetzer and John Miles here last week on the show, and you can catch that on the Whoop website. Go to the archives and find the show, and you can watch it and see it again. The Corn Maze is going to open up next Saturday, and the admission for that day and that day only is $5. So that's a good time to take your grandbabies to go through the Corn Maze.
It's a tractor this year. Yes. It's a tractor farming scene on there.
They actually do the designs themselves now, which just absolutely amazes my brain. And then also next weekend, something that happens very rarely here on September the 20th on Friday night from 6 to 9 p.m. downtown. The folks that are bringing in all the antique cars for the antique car show on Saturday are going to have some of the cars set up downtown. And there's 225 cars coming to this meet.
This is a national meet,
yes. Then on Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. over at Westwood, it's free entry. You just have to park over on Villa Drive and maybe walk a short distance. And you get to see all the cars there from 27 different states, 225 automobiles. You can't miss it. It's going to be fabulous.
And real quick, I want to say hello to my friends over at Stadium Barbecue over off Inman Street. They're at Inman and 17th, I believe it is. And if you haven't been to Stadium Barbecue, go over and see Barry. They have banana pudding fried pies. And Jim just looked at me. Wait, stop, Jim. Stop.
Cherry cheesecake with fried pies, what we had. It was fabulous.
And but the barbecue's really good there. And then over at the diner on First Street, got the biggest old cat head biscuits you ever seen in your life over there. And I had me one of those this morning and some sausage and
some good coffee.
That was a couple hours ago, and I'm still almost full. I could have another one now, though.
Where is that on First Street?
Right there at the Inman
Street.
Little
old Ford Inn.
Oh, okay. The little Ford. That's the diner on First Street, and they have a great hamburger at lunch, but great big
they
cat
close
head biscuit.
early on Saturdays. Ron and I drove all the way across town to get a hamburger there one Saturday afternoon, and they had closed at noon.
But now, go ahead.
I wanted to mention, I'm so excited that next weekend on
You're
the
excited.
21st, I am. Finally, got him here from Georgia, Mike Bell.
Not Senator Mike Bell.
Not Senator Mike Bell, but our friend Mike Bell from down Atlanta way. He is a incredible racing historian. He does the website called GeorgiaRacing.com, and he knows a whole lot about all the southeastern Tennessee dirt tracks and the racers, and he's going to be our guest next week. So if you've got somebody that likes to go fast in cars or hear about them, Mike's going to be your person to call, and especially if you have a question about old racers, he'll be here. On the 28th, we've got PDAB and PDAB's aunt. They're going to talk all about the Prospect area. And on the 5th, we're going to be talking about Buck's Pocket and Sugar Creek with Kent Inslee. Now, let's stop there and talk about Buck's Pocket and Sugar Creek.
All right. Well, now,
there's a fighting word.
The Buck's Pocket basically gets down to the money. There's a guy named Buck down there, and he ended up with everybody's money in his pockets. Now, some say he was a moonshiner, some say he was a gambler, and he's probably
some
all
said
those
he was
things.
all.
What was his? Deb, do you know what his last
Hicks.
name was? Buck Hicks. So,
of course, Debbie would know.
Well, I knew. So,
I still laugh when we were up at the cemetery tour a couple of years ago, and they introduced this guy was dressed like a soldier, I think a Union soldier, and he said, "And my wife, Tennessee Hicks," and I laughed. I just thought that was funny.
So yeah.
But we have Sugar
Creek. That was
Creek.
a description instead of a name, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee Hick.
Yeah, Sugar Creek.
Sugar Creek. You tell me.
I'm afraid he's going to throw that one back at me. Down in that area, almost to the Georgia line, there is a spring coming up out of the ground, and it has an abundance of sugar maples around the mouth of the spring there. So therefore, the name Sugar Creek has been given to that community for way back. I mean, back in Civil War days, it was called Sugar Creek down there. So that's where that community got its name.
It's kind of a hidden little gem of a community back
there. It is.
Yeah.
Oh, folks,
Pretty
if you want to go back and see, well, now the church is not real old there anymore. You go down
Hughes Lake Road.
Thank you. Hughes Lake Road, which used to have a big lake on it and a mill and a big businesses and things right there on the Georgia line. And, of course, it was run by the Hughes boys, and a whole bunch of the Hugheses owned all the property down in there. Leander Hughes And when you go over, you pass Union Church, which was named because I didn't know why they called it Union Church until I started writing that Confederate history book. And I decided it's because there wasn't any Confederates down there anywhere in that community. They were all Union. And turn right there at Union Church and go over about a mile and you take a left. There's a Methodist road sign there, and you go over to the Sugar Creek, and it has this wonderful little cemetery, and as far as I know, it has our only grave house in Bradley County still standing there that was built probably in the 1880s, handmade brick. There were 2 other grave houses there that have long since fallen. Usually big limbs come down and take them out. But anyway, and there's a tabernacle there too, which is like a little gazebo that they had night services in when it was too hot and they didn't have air conditioning and stuff. They had it right out there in the cemetery, which is kind of unique. But the church actually burned. The little white frame church that had been there burned in 1950, and they put back a little brick church.
Now, the difference between a grave house and a mausoleum is people built the graves are up in
They're
the building.
buried inside the building.
A grave house is the graves are normal graves. They just built a structure over the graves to protect them.
To keep them from sinking.
They're up in Short Creek, up in McMinn County. There are different types. There are brick ones, and there's some look like chicken coops almost over it. And they actually seen one up there. It's one of these carports.
Oh yeah,
like
aluminum carport.
Like
aluminum
Sears
carport.
carport.
But there's some belief that they keep the safe, and there's some of them look like doll houses. They're pretty interesting.
I saw a documentary about those.
Yeah, and
maybe last year.
We got a buddy that lives over in Smithville. His first name's John.
He studied a lot of that.
And he goes around all over the United States taking pictures of grave houses. And his website is www.gravewalkers.com, I believe. That's awful close to it if it's not grave. I'm pretty sure it's Grave Walkers. But you can go on there, and he has probably 1,000 pictures. Wow. And he's been way up in the mountains of Kentucky, places I would not go.
Yeah. Find a lot of rattlesnakes around graveyards.
Push that button, Ron.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Well, good morning. This
hey, Marilyn.
What's up, who I was before I said it. The fish truck will be here next Saturday at 11 a.m. at the Farmers Co-op on Blue Springs Road.
Okay, and if they need to order fish?
They can call T-Bandy at 478-2405.
There you go.
You were talking about different names on places, and I always like out where we go to church is Nopone. Mm-hmm. And I've heard some big fancy explanation, but I still think it's because that valley was so poor they didn't have a pound of bread.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was kind of, I always heard it came from the Civil War soldiers that when they were here fending for themselves and having to, go out through the countryside and gather up the food and stuff off the farms, there was no corn left. And so they just everybody knew that valley don't have a pone in it.
Marked it on the map as no pone, or pone is corn, right?
Marilyn, do you know a turn of meal?
Turn of meal.
I mean, yeah, like when you took your meal to be ground, you said you got it ground for a turn of meal.
Well, usually you took the corn and it was bushels of corn, so I would suspect that it would have been maybe some portion, either a peck or
one turn of the wheel, the big wheel.
Yeah, one turn of the big wheel. Now, sometimes that would be a good amount, and then it might not be, depending on.
I think it was probably some agreed to portion of the meal, but Ron and I started talking about that last week, and we couldn't decide what that.
Whatever amount they could grind down at one in one batch or something.
Mm-hmm.
That.
I'm sure it amounted to some certain poundage that they, it was, like he says, it was kind of probably agreed upon, but they would take in some places you hear them telling about that they would go like to the mill and take a bushel or 2 bushel, and because they needed the meal. Mm-hmm. But in other places they did it in larger quantities, and so I'm sure
I'm sure it's proportionate, whatever it is. Come to think of it, that makes good sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Doing it.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, creeks. Mouse Creek.
Mouse Creek there was a Indian chief named Mouse.
Or an Indian named
Yeah,
Mouse.
well, and a lot of times the chief was a big landowner and the mayor of that little area. All right, now to hear, there are two creeks here that we call Candies Creek, Cadies, and then we call one Harris Creeks.
Yeah.
Okay, there was
that's not really the names of them.
No, not off the original
That's what they
maps.
become, but what are they really?
Well, Candies Creek was originally Candy''S. Henry Candy lived up in that community. Actually, he lived up in McMinn County. And when we made the agreement that Bradley County, what was now Bradley County, was going to become the Cherokee Nation, he was given a 600-acre block of land, a reservation here in Bradley County. And so he just kind of moved over to the river. That's right, Henry Candy. And so Candies Creek Mission was named after him, Candies Creek Ridge. And so Candies Creek actually runs from the south to the north. But that's where that name came from. And then over the term of years, as the English-speaking people made the maps, it changed into Candies.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like to see that New Cleveland Elementary School be called Candies, Candy''S, Creek School. I think that would be a proper thing to
just
do.
very short distance from where the Candies Creek Mission is. Right across the highway through the woods over there towards where Johnny Brewer lives back in that area.
It's
right
where we
across
think
there.
it was, yes.
Yeah.
But Candies Creek is right there.
Okay.
But that's where Candies Creek came
Harris
from.
Creek.
Hare Conrad. Hare Conrad was living where Candies Creek and Harris Creek splits off. And on the old maps, it's Harris Creek, Hair''S. And over the term of years, the English-speaking people made the maps, and they put it Harris Creek instead of Hares Creek.
Mm-hmm. Klingon Ridge, Deb.
That's
where the old Holiday Inn is, or Mountain View now.
Klingon Ridge is named after, I don't remember his first name, but he was in the Klingon family.
A.J. Klingon, sheriff.
He was the second sheriff after our first sheriff died
I think
mysteriously.
it's A.J. Klingon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the first elected sheriff. The first one was appointed, and he died. This guy was appointed, and then he was elected. So people say that he was the first elected sheriff.
No doubt his name was Andrew Jackson.
Yeah,
Yes.
probably. And he lived there on close to where Cleveland Middle School is now. He's buried there close to Cleveland Middle School up on the hill there. But that's the name of that. And he married one of the Blythe girls. And her daddy ran Blythe's Ferry over in Meigs County. And Blythe's Ferry Road took you there. Mm-hmm. And his name was William Blythe. And that's why Blythe's Ferry is named that.
Yeah. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
How you doing?
Great.
Do you know where the old gravel bank road was at?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I didn't know if you knew which road it is now.
Well, tell us.
It's West Side.
That's right.
It's West Side Drive. I remember Chip Bryant's the one that told me that. And they dug a lot of that out of there to fill in the road to make Harrison Pike when they built the new Harrison Pike.
And they named it West Side. I think after then, later on they did.
Yeah, I think so too. Because in my lifetime, I don't remember ever being called Gravel Bank. There was quite the little skirmish there between the Confederates and the Union too, right in that area.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know. That's where my grandfather was raised at. I mean, well, he wasn't raised there, but he lived there.
Yeah. Who was your grandfather?
Ben Shelton.
Shelton. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for calling.
Right. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I tell you the one that somebody threw at me on Facebook that I don't know. They said that King Edward Avenue used to be known as Row 10.
Or 10 Row.
10 Row.
10 Row.
So I got out
number 10.
The
10
number
row.
10 row. I had never heard that before, but I thought, okay, it's going to be the 10th road from Wildwood Avenue. Got out my map, boop, 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 and it's like the 8th or 9th row.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that didn't work out too well for me.
Well, maybe they've eliminated a road. Mm-hmm. What? Oldfield, Deb. Everyone wants to know why Oldfield. And then I want to know what's called Chippewa and Watauga and
Wetumpka.
Yeah.
Well, I have Oldfield's one of those things that I've thought about a lot because it's obviously a very well-known name here in Bradley County. And I was telling that I thought that it came from an Indian named Field, And when he, out of Richard Fields and all those really famous Indians, here in Bradley County in the census of 1835, there was Oldfield. When you got old, they just put old in front of your name and you became Oldfield. So I thought perhaps that it was his property. And that may still be true because it was in that area. But 90-year-old Carl Green called me and told me that his mom said that World War I soldiers would come from north from up out of Georgia where they were camped. They would come up here and they would do drills on the old field near the depot in Bradley County. And so it comes from those two things.
Well, what area exactly is it would be the boundaries of Old Field?
Wildwood Avenue, Blythe School,
Cherry Factory Lane, and over down towards town, Wildwood towards Ocoee, South Ocoee. That would be the old field.
Let's see who's on the line.
Go ahead, caller.
I want y'all to talk about two things, and one of them is Bigsby Creek, and then General Joe Wheeler, what he had to do in Cleveland. And I don't want to hear Ron Moore say anything because he picked the Vols, and I don't want to put any credit in what he's got to say. And only other thing I was going to say is I spend a lot of time on Sugar Creek. It's a beautiful creek, and I'm going to hang up and let y'all talk.
Okay.
Well, Doug, in my defense, I picked Tennessee because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing.
Plus, one more, you're telling April Whaley about all the gold up there on her dairy farm, and you know that there's no gold up there, and you know the Vols aren't got a chance.
That was just to make April money, and I circled the wrong one by mistake.
We were talking about Chippewa and Winnetoga and all those names.
Watauga.
And I know that
Wetumpka or something.
Yeah.
Debbie Riggs is here online. She and I had a discussion online last week about there's a 1919 map showing all those Indian names over in that community. Then somewhere along the way, some of them changed to names of more famous people in this community: Wilson Avenue, Hardwick Street. All those names like that. I don't know where King Edward came from, and I don't know where Tenrow. I don't know if Debbie's ever heard of that or not. But that 1919,
King Edward cigar. Yeah.
Apparently, sometime in that area when that farm broke up, and they just named the streets.
Began to develop the area.
They wanted it to be
residential.
They developed it as residential.
Those are good stories.
To go with the factories that were bringing people out of the farmlands and into the city, and you couldn't travel very easily then, so they just moved to the city where you could make money.
Do you know Bigsby Creek?
Well, now some people say Bigsby, and some people say Bigby Creek, and it's up there close to where the road Freewheel crosses over Candy's Creek up there on the left, and there was an Indian there named Bigsby. I think his name was Bigsby. And he was here until the removal, and he's on the census also. So that community's just named after him.
Bushyhead lived out in that area, too.
Bushyhead lived where Cleveland High School is.
Oh, okay.
Jesse Bushyhead, and I don't know what his family name originally was, but he came and started living with the Cherokees, married into the Cherokees, and he had this big old Irishman, and he had this big old bushy head of red hair, and they called him Bushyhead, and it kind of stuck. As a matter of fact, some of his relatives even became the chief out west.
And Joe Wheeler?
I don't know anything about Joe Wheeler.
Well,
did you see me look at Jim?
Wheeler, of course, was in this area with Bragg before Chickamauga, and he was largely Bragg was dependent upon him, and your cavalry had probably three main jobs: reconnaissance, because they could go out, they're on horseback, they could go out, look at what's going on in an area, and get back quickly to report what the enemy's doing. Then they were shock troops. They could come in and rout a lightly defended area. Nobody wants to be have a horse ride down on you. And then the third thing was they were constantly in motion, and they could be used to confuse an enemy about where you were, because they could be over here today and then over here tomorrow. But Wheeler had been tasked with patrolling the south side of the Tennessee River to try to see where Rosecrans was going to try to cross. Well, Wheeler again, Bragg wasn't well liked by most of his subordinate commanders, and Wheeler was one of these guys who's going to do what he wants to do. He's going to tell you, if you're the general, sure, I'll do what you want. Then he's going to do his own thing, and he basically sent two of his divisions back to rest and recuperate, and left a small force along the river. But he was familiar with this area, and then so after, fast forward ahead to the Battle of Atlanta, and when Sherman is getting ready to start towards Savannah, by then John Bell Hood, after Bragg was relieved and John Bell Hood was placed in command, they sent Wheeler up on a raid, and his path was to come through this area, tear up railroad tracks and so forth, then go up and over into, cross the river around Blythe Ferry, head over into Middle Tennessee, doing the same thing, harassing the enemy, and then back down to Decatur, Alabama, in that area. Well, he did all that, but he didn't really have much effect. But he did spend a little time in this area, and he was a part of some of these alleged depredations against the loyal Union people of East Tennessee. They would bring people before him and say, "This guy's a Union sympathizer," and he's
your operator.
Nope.
Take them away, and they might be taken away and not be seen again. But he tolerated a lot of atrocities against the Union sympathizers of East Tennessee when his troops would come through, and his reputation suffers greatly from that. But he was a very dashing figure. But this, like I was telling you, this book, this Failure in the Saddle, it kind of takes him and even the Wizard of the Saddle again to task for not really doing their job as effectively as they should have.
Oh yeah.
During the East Tennessee campaigns, but Wheeler was here. He came through here, and he was kind of like the boogeyman. Wheeler's cavalry's coming. But
sort of like Gatewood too.
Yeah. But he was a legitimate Army officer. The Dalton Pike area after Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and the beginnings of the Atlanta campaign, when Bragg's army was camped and Hood's army were camped at Dalton, the Union was always concerned that they might try to come up the old Dalton-Charleston road, and there's one ridge between there and the railroad. Yes. And again, so the Union had picket posts at different locations all along Dalton Pike up on the ridges, so they could keep that area under observation for any attempt by Confederate forces, probably led by or consisting mainly of cavalry, that might come north up out of Dalton that way. And I know someone who recently has been doing some digging and found evidence of a Union picket post overlooking Dalton Pike. Well,
it's just a mile really over that ridge from Dalton Pike down into the Blue Springs Valley where the railroad
Almost
is.
Exactly a mile.
And so they just stayed up on the top of each side of the ridge, and they could see what was happening on both the roads. And there you go. You got Blue.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
It's just me again. I want to ask Debbie something.
Go ahead.
Debbie, you know up there where Nancy Ward's grave is on 411?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, where is her family buried?
Well, I believe her brother's buried right there beside her.
I thought there's only one grave there.
No, there's two or three graves there, and I think one of them's her brother. I don't really know the answer to that question, but I will tell you that the old people used to say that grave moved quite often.
What do you mean?
Well, they picked that spot because her 95-year-old grandson, she died when he was 5 years old. When he was 95, he said, "This is where they buried my grandmother," and that's where they put the permanent grave. But I think that she's probably buried seriously there on that farm.
There was
somewhere.
A house right behind the grave.
Area,
There was a house right
we
by
have
the
a
grave.
picture that there is a house up on the top of that knoll. So I don't know if they knew exactly where she was buried, but it's a nice memorial.
Maybe she's not even buried there then.
Good possibility. Yeah.
It's like Sleeping Rabbit.
Yeah, Sleeping Rabbit's not buried where he said he's buried either.
We learn something every day.
That's
we
right.
do. We learned that.
Lincoln wasn't buried where he was supposed to have been buried for the first 20 years or 30 years either.
Okay, I hope they end up figure out where they're going to bury me. I'd hate to get lost.
I just hope I'm all in one piece. Is what I don't want to be like Hood down there.
Thanks.
That brings us a question to mind about Nancy Ward. Have you read anything recently about the stolen Nancy Ward statue?
Not recently. I know that it was made, and it was supposed to go up there, I suppose, at her grave. And it's about a 4-foot tall statue of a woman holding a fish. And somewhere along the way, it was actually...
The sculptor sold it to someone.
He got desperate and he
Right.
sold it. It went to Greenville or Greene County, Tennessee, or something.
In a little cemetery
Stood in a little tiny cemetery and stood out there for years. Polk County paid the owner of it Polk County Historical Society paid $1,000 for it. And they drove to get it in the pickup truck, and when they got there, she was gone, and they lost their $1,000.
Well, I heard the check is still uncashed, is what I've heard.
Probably so. Well, they were told there was something about they had to find the check or they had to find the receipt or something to get their monies back. But all of a sudden, Nancy's little statue, or the statue that was supposed to be of someone that was supposed to represent Nancy, showed up on the front of some big auction house up north. They were getting ready to have an auction. They were going to auction her off. Well, Polk County squealed and I don't know what the end of that story is.
All I know is I've researched it on the internet, and I think the last thing I read about, the most recent thing, was about 2009, and there were lawyers were involved, and they were discussing the whoever has it now basically says, I'll sell it to you for X number of dollars, and they're saying, but it's stolen property. You can't sell stolen property.
You can't sell me my property back.
So they were in negotiations to try to get the thing returned and sent to Polk County, but I hadn't read anything more recent than that.
The only thing recently I've read about Nancy Ward is that it would be humanly impossible for her to have as many relatives that claim to be related to her. I thought that was kind of funny.
Now, Deb, this is one that the people live around here, we think absolutely nothing of this. But back when I worked in the cable industry, I had people come in here all the time, and they would laugh at the name of this place. It's Michigan Avenue Road. It's an avenue and a road. Well, first off, we don't have any roads that head towards Michigan. Can you tell us why it would be Michigan?
Let's start at Hiwassee River and work our way south.
All right.
Okay, Dry Valley Road.
Right.
Well, you would think that would mean that there's no water in that valley.
No creek in that valley.
And we know that that's not true. There's creeks and springs and wonderful water all through that valley. But what had happened is that probably gazillion years ago, I don't know how long ago, there was a big body of water that ran down through that valley, and over the number of years it dried up, and everybody started using that dry roadbed as a road, and so therefore it was called the Dry Valley Road. But then you got down so far there in Tasso, the road would come down and it would turn.
Which is named after some guy in Europe.
And it would go some roundabout way into Cleveland. Well, they decided they needed a little bit straighter shot, so they built a road from Tasso Road or Dry Valley Road area to 20th Street, what we call 20th Street now, or Bates Pike. No, Benton Pike. Excuse me, Benton Pike. And they named it Michigan Avenue Road because during the Civil War, the Michigan troops were stationed in that area or camped in that area for a great long time, is what I've been told.
So the Michigan troops were there. I forgot what the troop. But anyway, it's still an avenue and road.
Yeah,
Michigan
I just think
Avenue Road.
Atlanta has Boulevard Street.
Yeah.
So.
There you go.
Now, Fort Hill. We've always called it Fort Hill Cemetery, but apparently there may have been a fort there.
Well, it was called City Cemetery for a while. It was called Cleveland Cemetery for a while, and it was used prior to Cleveland being formed in 1836. We know that there were people, being buried there that early. But there was a fort close to the end of the ridge there where the Boys and Girls Club is now. And then there was one that was down on the south end close to where the Woolen family is buried. And one of them was called Sedgwick. I'm not sure which one, Fort Sedgwick maybe I'm thinking of something else. But anyway, there were two forts there, one that was looking towards the north and one that was looking towards the south. And
Near
so
the
that's
railroad.
and the railroad. And they were watching the railroad and they were watching the roads.
The
and
Confederate or Union forts?
Union.
Now, was these like you see in the cowboy pictures with little
they were
what do you call those staked walls?
Palisades.
Palisades. Thank you. I couldn't think of that word.
I think that they were probably just like a little
They're
log
more camp or
structure,
encampments.
Earth embankments.
Yeah, encampment more or less. Yeah.
And there's an evaluation that was done. People trying to get back monies because of the damage done by the Union troops that were camped right in there. And basically, it said they took down the fences. They call them the rails. They took down the rails and they
Outbuildings.
the outbuildings and everything, and built their structures for them to stay in because they were there for a long period of time. And of course, the cemetery then would just been a little small knoll. But we know that there were soldiers buried there at that time on that great big lawn that I call the Confederate lawn.
And now, a little segue here. Up in Charleston today, I think the Cowpea Festival's going on. It started this morning, runs all day, and there's Billy Dean entertains tonight. So check your local newspaper from
What's
last
their little
night.
mascot? I saw him in the paper.
Cowpea.
Chester.
Chester the Cowpea or something. Yeah.
I remember his first name, but it was,
I don't know. The T-shirt was really cute. He says "World Peas."
Just in case someone doesn't know what a cowpea is, this is not a naming contest or a distance contest. It's talking about a vegetable cowpea, which basically quick for us would be called a black-eyed pea, field peas and things like that. That we didn't used to eat, but we shipped them off more for feed and that. So, but during the Civil War, when people were hungry, they started cooking them up, and we probably learned a lot from our black that we had in the community because they were left to eat the crops that weren't the premium crops, just like that's where we got ribs.
They turned into something good.
The ribs and fat
that we pay a lot of money for
what,
now.
You put fat back in anything, and you make it pretty darn good.
But the soldiers would walk by the fields, and they'd say, "Well, there's something to eat," and they'd say, "Well, that's what you feed the cows," and so that's how it got the name Cowpeas. But do go up and support our friends up there in Charleston today. Let me run down some of these real quick. Of course, we have Old Alabama Road, and we have Chattanooga Pike, and that word Pike kind of follows the name of the roads. We have Harrison Pike, Chattanooga Pike,
Bates Pike,
Dalton Pike, Bates Pike. Wildwood was called Wildwood Pike at some point in time. And that word pike means that there was a fee charge to go on there, like
turnpike.
Like a turnpike, yeah.
A stick, an actual log that would be turned across the road, and you paid the fee. They would turn the pike.
And usually, if you lived on that segment of road, you were allowed to go through there free. But if you didn't live, you had to pay. And there were a lot of fights at those turnpikes.
And you had to get permission, I think, from the state to build a turnpike and operate.
Well, and once you said, I'm going to operate this next 2 miles of pike and I'm going to charge people this fee to use it, you had to maintain it. And that's how you were able to charge. So basically, it's the golden rule. He who has gold rules.
The rules, yeah.
And they people that could afford to build a road was able to make money off of that road. And there were a lot of those here in Bradley County. Then at some point in time, the counties in the state started taking the roads over, and everyone over the age of 18 that lived on a road had to help maintain it. And then that changed.
Or pay a fee.
Or pay a fee. Pay a tax. You had to pay a road tax, or you had to work on the road. And there were a lot of people who went to jail because they refused to pay that road tax because they said they didn't use the roads.
Schools. So, George R. Stewart, named after the Stewart family. Arnold was D.S. Arnold, I believe.
D.C. Arnold.
D.C. Arnold was the first school board chairman. So names like that.
First
but there's one
superintendent.
school here that I can't figure out why they called it that.
What's that?
Well, they was the number 4 school.
Yeah.
There was the
only one with a number.
Well, that was the old number 4, and then the new number 4. But there was never a 1, 2, or 3, or 5, or 6. But there was number 4. What's the reason behind the number 4 school?
I have no idea.
That's back down in the Sugar Creek area.
I would
There
think that possibly at that period of time, the school systems were beginning to build their own schools. Before that, it was the Wooden School, and it was usually named after whoever gave the money for the school back in those days. And
My
so
mother went to Wooten School.
Wooten School, and down on Ladd Springs Road, that old building burned, but someone gave us a fantastic picture of children inside the building from 1940 something.
48. Yeah.
We went out.
My mother's in that picture.
Yeah.
I bet she is.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
They
have
if it's the one that's been in the paper.
Probably so. And that leads me to this, we'd like to thank Mr. Frazier that we went out Sunday afternoon and picked up some racing videos, and we had a good time watching people turn left all afternoon in 1990s cars, and that's going to add to our documentary. Anyway, number 4 school, only thing I can figure out is maybe they had built, this was their 4th building, and they just couldn't decide on a name. I don't know.
Well, that's all we want to go to the number 4 school, you know.
Oh, we had
Euclid Avenue. I mean, that just don't seem like a real
Euclid
common
Waterhouse.
Well, see, but we call it Euclid Street now, but it was Water Street at one time.
Because it was Waterhouse Street, and all of it wouldn't fit on a sign, so they cut it down to Water Street.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hello, Ron and Debbie.
Hello, Miss Ella.
Ella.
I was sleeping in.
You got drunk again last night?
I went out, but I didn't get drunk.
What? And did you have any to drink?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, we have a policeman here. You can't admit to a lot of things.
Well, they know I don't do nothing wrong.
No, that's not what he said on this report he had here.
Yeah. He ought to catch my sister instead of me. They need to watch her car, man. We was coming from Cleveland, and she run a stop sign. She was going 80 miles an hour and couldn't hardly stop. I said, "Hey, Ruth, there's a car in front of you." She went and turned the curve, and she went off the road and pulled it from a truck. They need to watch that Mercury, the green Mercury Marquis.
And what's her tag number?
What color is the car, so we know to move over?
It's a lime green, and license number is 21206. And her name is Irma. I'm telling you, she don't need to be driving. She drives like a
Well, there are two things. She don't need to be driving, and if she is, you don't need to be riding with her.
I know, but I don't have much choice. We were coming from Kingston. We went up to see my nieces and nephews. So.
Well, there's 27 accidents reported between Kingston and Cleveland there, so I think we know who's done it now.
Anyway, we were just flying down through there, and I seen a couple of cop cars, but I guess they didn't see her.
She's going 80 miles an hour. Didn't have her lights on.
And it was in the daytime. But I am so scared to drive with her, I tell you.
Well, next time she's driving 80 like that, you know what you need to do?
What?
Wake her up.
She's awake. She just don't have her mind on driving. She had her mind on something else, or talking on the phone. Or.
Oh, okay. Don't text and drive now.
Anyway, I made it home, thank goodness.
All right. Well, Miss Ellen, it's good to hear from you. We was beginning to worry about you there.
I'm going to start my burial the first, too, was pay my first premium on it.
I thought you said you was going to start your burial. I said, well, you know, you might have wait till you die before you start it. You bought your plot already?
No, just a premium, just a starting of the bill.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you last longer than the payments, Miss Ella.
Well, if they said if I waited any longer, I'd have to pay more.
That's right.
Well, if you wait till you die, you don't have to pay anything.
Yeah, but who's going to do it? Hey, they're still working on my shirts. I don't know when they're getting done.
Oh, okay.
I talked to Pokey last night.
Mama whoop.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Miss Ella.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You know, we have some streets up in Charleston. We have Cass Street and Scott Street and all of those streets that were named after the generals and such that were up there during the removal. If you ever watched them. Now, one of our main drags here in Cleveland was called Lee Street, L-E-A Street, after the Lee family that came in here. Matter of fact, Mr. Lee was the person that divvied up the property, that he ran the property office in downtown Cleveland. But over the course of the years, about 100 years ago, someone decided that they needed to rename that street, and it was a big fight in the newspapers. You have to read it, all the reasons why to change the name and not change the names, a lot like what you get now. But Lee Street was changed to Broad Street, and that was to indicate, just as Broadway does in Charleston, Tennessee, that was the broadest street in Cleveland, and you could turn around a team of horses and a wagon on it, and that's how it got the name Broad Street. Ocoee Street, of course, is named after the district, the Ocoee district, which is, what we call this area when we, started selling off the property.
Go back to Euclid. Tell people who he was.
Euclid Waterhouse. He was a very rich man. And during the Civil War, they went down and lived over in the edge of Murray County, and his house is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes on the historical tours down there, you can actually go through it. But the road was initially called Waterhouse Road, and they shortened that to Water Street because Waterhouse was too long to fit on the signs. And then somewhere along the way, they called it Euclid Avenue. And it's just like over at the corner of Harrison Pike and Georgetown Road. You have the Johnstons sold off the farm over there, so you got Summerfield Street, and you have streets named after people in the family right in there. That was pretty accurate. Going back to Georgetown Road, there was a Cherokee over in that area, and his name was George, and we think that his house is still standing over there. Matter of fact, it's a piece of property that's for sale right now. And there's the Indian Village Road over there, too. That kind of tells you that it indeed was a big major crossroads, and it was operated by a Cherokee.
Good morning, live on Old Town Cleveland.
Yes. Is this Ron?
It is.
Ron, my name's Donna. I was calling for Darlene Woods. She won a spoon.
It's laying here.
Yeah, she's not feeling too good, and she was supposed to be up there earlier. She's wanting to know if she can come on here in the next little bit when she can feel better and get it.
We're going to be here about 15 more minutes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Right.
Somebody online's asking me about Waterville. I don't know exactly how it got the name Waterville other than
springs.
There's a whole bunch of really nice springs.
Where the golf course is, there was a huge lake there, wasn't it?
And it was called Garden Springs. And that was part of the old Levi Truitt, from the Truitt Road, Truitt School fame, Levi Truitt Farm. And over the course of years, they had church picnics there on Sunday afternoons on that
Chief
big
Snyder's
lake.
family involved
Chief
in
Snyder's family's involved in that too, and it was the Dave Snyder farm at some point in time. And then they decided to reroute the spring, and so the lake went away, or they were stopped. They were damming it up and making the lake, and turned it into the golf course there. But I would imagine it's just because there's so much water in the area, it was called Waterville Lake. Also, up here we had the big lake at Stewart, too.
Right. Yeah. Cleveland has a lot of springs and water.
Cedar Lake down off South Lee Highway.
Right.
There, down below where Bradley High School is, there was
a
lake.
Yeah, where
Cedar Lake Hotel.
Cedar Hotel and all that. Yeah, there's back in there.
Behind it, there was a lake.
Now, the one I can't figure out is Trickum. Trickum. The church, the graveyard, and the area down where Mount Carmel is now was called Trickum at some point in time.
Somebody says.
It's on the old map, is all I know.
It is on a map. I've never seen it on a map. But there's a Trickum community down in Whitfield County.
Yes, I've seen it too.
It's over in the Keith area, off of Old Ringgold Road. That's the only one that I've ever been able to document. There was an actual settlement, and I think a church, maybe there at the Trickum in Georgia. But I've heard about the Trickum School. I know there's certainly no evidence of it anymore.
No, there's no evidence. It's supposed to have been where the cemetery is now.
Some people are glad there's no evidence of things these days. Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, it's Pat calling you back again. You talking about Trickum. Eureka area was also called Trickum. And I think it got its name from the Cherokees. They have a story they tell about Trickster Turtle. And they have a character in their lore called the Trickster. I think that's where it's got its name.
Okay. I don't know. It's just such a funny little name.
Yeah. But before this place was Eureka was called McPherson. Before it was called McPherson, it was known as Trickham.
Yeah, and I think is Dot the same place?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's McPherson Dot.
Okay. I just know on a map I saw Dot, and I thought, well, they couldn't think of a very creative name there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, talking about Weatherly Switch, down where I grew up, there where I live now still, we had Marble Switch. There were the Blue Springs Road crosses the railroad there below my mom's place, and there was when I was a small child, the switch and the sidetrack was still there. They weren't being used anymore. But on the in the northwest corner of that field of Mom's there, when they bought that property, there was still the remains of a big red clay ramp that had been built from. There's no other red clay over there. Evidently, it was taken from maybe these mine excavations and hauled over there to build a ramp so they could load marble onto railroad cars there. And they mined that marble over on the Red Hill area and down from Red Hill down into Georgia at different places. And that was where they found the manganese deposits, was in that same layers of red clay where the marble was. And it was a pink marble tinged by all that red clay. And they mined it and shipped it out from there. But I can still remember there was an old building there. The foundation was still there, and that had at one time been the old post office. They actually had a post office there at Marble Switch for several years. And the Hungry Hollow Road now that I live on.
Hungry Hollow.
Yeah,
there's another name.
Used to be the Marble Switch Road. Used to be called the Marble Switch Road. I don't know who changed it or why it got to be called Hungry Hollow, but the old original name was Marble Switch Road.
Of course, Old Fort up in Polk County is where the Old Fort that's
Marr.
been moved about 15 times is where it originated.
It confuses people badly too. The Fort Marr about it wasn't there, and it wasn't the last place it was either. Originally, they've moved, like you said, they've moved it around so much.
They've moved it around. It's at G Creek now, and nicely refurbished, and looks like it's much safer there in that spot. And of course, we have Mineral Springs. And of course, wasn't named after him. It's just because there was a lot of minerals in the water there. But you have Ball Springs, which was named after the Ball family. And we have the famous murder there of Michael Ball. That's documented in the history of the rebellion that he was murdered, and so we know that's where the Ball family, Baugh family, lived.
Bradley County is named after Colonel Edward Bradley, and to what I've read is he really had nothing to do with Bradley County or this area.
He was from Shelby County, friend of Andrew Jackson.
The reason that this county was named after a horse bet or horse bets is what the popular story or folklore is, that Bradley and Andrew Jackson gambled a lot on horse racing. And apparently Andrew Jackson was not very good at it. And so he had lost and owed Bradley a lot of money. And they exchanged the naming of this county for his debt. So Bradley County was named after a horse bet, and that's what the folklore says. So now Benjamin Cleveland, of course, was a general at the...
Are we going to have a statue made of Bradley?
We could, yes. Yeah.
Benjamin Cleveland really had no ties here either.
Ironically, he does have some family that lives here now.
Distant relatives that live here.
Up in the Walker Valley area is
named after the Walker family.
Which
at the Wilson farm, there's a
grave. The name?
I don't know what you're trying to think of.
The Isabels, or there's some other name that are cousins or relations to Cleveland.
There's a
Benjamin Cleveland.
Spriggs.
Spriggs, there we go.
Yeah, that's almost like Isabel.
Yeah, it's very
You see
close.
what I live with, Jim?
In my mind, that was very, very close
The
since I had no
Spriggs-
idea what I was talking about.
The Spriggs and the Cleveland family were also related to the Klingons and the Blythe. So apparently they own a big chunk of property in this area.
Mhm.
Mayfield School was named after Pearson Mayfield. And when it was built in 1928, Mr. Mayfield, P.B. Mayfield, Pearson Mayfield, was the chairman of the first school board, and that's why the school was named after him. Now, that name goes also, his name was Pearson Blythe Mayfield, and that's where Blythewood Farms comes from. The name comes from
Blythe Avenue.
Mrs. Neal over there on Blythewood Farm. Named the farm after her dad. His middle name was Blythe, which is a real common name coming down through the Mayfield family. And that's how that came. You know, Blythe Avenue, I would think so, because that's when they put in the school, and they called it Blythe Avenue School. You know, and then you have Blythe Ferry Road that goes all the way back to the William Blythe.
What about Templeton Hill School, which is where the fire department is?
Was the mayor's
Yeah, I
name
think it was-
Templeton?
That's right.
Right.
And that's also where he lived. He lived right there. So it could either be the Templeton Farm or that the mayor was Templeton, or both of that could be true.
Yeah.
Where the fire hall is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fire main
and
fire
the
hall.
and the old gym's still there, I understand.
Yes, it is.
Joseph McMahon was the governor of Tennessee, and so McMahon County is named after him.
And his grave's in Calhoun.
It
Again?
is. It is.
Wasn't it moved to downtown?
They tried to move it to downtown Athens, and there's that old fellow that's in my book that everybody loves to read about. Jonathan Returns Megs Only was 80-something, and his dad had shown him where McMahon's grave was. Now, can you imagine being the governor and your grave's not marked? And it was there in that little Calhoun cemetery, and the big wigs from Athens came down and said, "Oh no, the governor of Tennessee." And that our county's named after, he should be in the big town of Athens. And this old guy wouldn't tell them. And it was a big standoff. And finally, the big statue was brought to Calhoun and put over his grave there. It's at the little park. You can go there and walk through that little cemetery and see it. Of course, Meigs County is named after Return Jonathan Meigs. That was the Indian agent.
We still don't know what Charleston got its name, do we?
No, it's just that somebody like Charleston, South Carolina is what we're thinking. But you do have the Wool Street, Scott Street, all those streets up there named after those generals. And again, it's the most historic place in America that is not nationally recognized like it should be, but it's getting there. And I would like to mention that next Sunday, not tomorrow, but the next Sunday, when the Historical Society has their meeting up there, Jack Baker will be back in town. He's the president of the National Trail of Tears, and I imagine coming in maybe to announce the fact that that area is being certified as a national spot on the National Trail of Tears. Of course, the Johnston Park comes from the Johnston family. There were 4 houses that occupied that space, and at some point in time, the Johnston family bought the remaining properties there and turned it into a park.
What about Deer Park?
Deer Park, that's when you have people that kind of, you have to imagine that Deer Park was out in the middle of the country. And all that area was big farms with barns behind it. And it was very likely that it was just a place that the deer congregated. And then it seems to me at some point in time, someone actually had
some deer there.
Had deers pinned in there that you could go see.
Almost a petting zoo type area, what I'd read or seen somewhere.
In 1948 or so, the city decided to turn it into a park, and therefore they named it Deer Park.
What did they call Baldwin Branch or Creek, which turns into Mouse Creek, Dye Creek?
Because every factory around dumped their dye in it before the days of
particularly Hardwick Woolen Mill.
Yeah, and so they said it was red one day,
go out and see
green
what
one
color the creek's
day,
gonna
blue. So they called it Dye Creek.
All right. Well, folks, that's been the show there. Jim, you got any
gosh,
finally?
it's already 12 o'clock,
You got
Jim.
any final comments or anything you want to talk
I would
about?
like to let everybody know this coming Thursday, September 26th, at Cleveland State Community College, room 127 of the Mary T. Barker Humanities Building at 5 p.m. There's going to be a lecture on the Battle of Chickamauga.
Oh, great.
Anybody that's interested in learning more about it.
Who's going to be giving
It'll
that?
The history, some of the history professors there.
Brian Reed and
Neil, I can't think of the gentleman's last name. but it's going to be some real historians talking about the Battle of Chickamauga.
And that's Thursday?
Thursday, 5 p.m., Mary T. Barker Humanities Building, room 127 at Cleveland State. I think that's the one that's kind of like a auditorium.
Over in the Humanities
Yeah.
Building? Yeah. The last time I parked over close to the tennis courts and walked over there, I encountered a skunk at the dumpster. So park in front of the gym and walk up the hill. But they do lectures, very detailed lectures, pretty interesting. And they've done this quite a bit during the 150th anniversary. And we have some really great historians here. And we didn't get to Bendabout Farms or Benton or Bible Street or we'll have to do another show sometime.
You still only have 4 or 5 more pages left of your notes. So.
Yeah, well,
but
20 pages these notes have gotten to be. Well, thank you, folks, and I am really excited about next week's show when we'll be talking about racing in the area. And when you hear Mike, our listeners are really going to enjoy his beautiful voice and such knowledge.
And our documentary is heading along. We have the opening music is now completed. John Cooks wrote that for us, and we have our opening footage already completed. Matter of fact, we'll start actually building the opening to the documentary here next week, and still it's scheduled about April of next year when it'll come out. We have some really great interviews already in the can. If you have old photos, if you have old pictures, if you have 8mm film,
we really need some 1960s and early 70s stuff right now.
It would be really great help to just add to it. We have a lot of old pictures and things of that nature. So, as always, we like to say, you've got to help us preserve history. You've got to take the first thing. Get the pictures from under the bed and out of the closet and the drawer and the shoe boxes, and get someone older in your family to start helping you put names on the back of them. Take you some peel-off labels, write them on the labels, pull them on the back of the pictures, because when those folks are gone, there'll be plenty of people who won't know who they are. We'll always know about Pearl Harbor, folks, but we may not know what happened in your family or down your street or in the places that you and your family worked. So it's up to you to do that. We'll see you again next week here, and we'll be talking with racing next week here on Old Town Cleveland.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check in.